Welcome to the Gentleman Project podcast. I'm Corey Moore.
And I'm Kirk Chug. Today we have joining us remotely from Galveston, Texas, Rey Medellin. He is a resilience specialist. And I don't know anybody else who's a resilience specialist, but he owns Island Resilience Center. He is a born on island native of Galveston, Texas. He grew up witnessing poverty, making him aware of the need for resilience skills and training with youth and adults. Rey's a military veteran, and he spent a lot of time also in the military on this topic, and he is a Master Resilience Trainer in the U.S. Army Reserves. He's got a master's degree in social work from Boston University. He's worked as a social worker in schools. He's worked as child protective service investigator, behaviorist specialist, social and emotional learning specialist. Like, this guy has all the bases covered when it comes to experience on this topic. If you've listened to the podcast, you know how often the term resilience or grit, stick-to-itiveness comes up as the thing that people want to teach their kids the most. The thing that they think will be the most valuable lesson that they can teach. So here we've got Rey. Hopefully we ask all of your questions as well today. Thanks for joining us remotely from Texas today, Rey.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on your guys' podcast. I'm really excited to talk about resilience. Resilience is my jam, as well as being a father. So I'm really excited. Thank you so much.
That's really cool. So you joined the military. When did you join the military?
So I joined the military. Well, I was in what you call the delayed entry program. So actually, before I graduated high school, I joined the military, mainly because at the time with my decisions and my choices, I didn't have any other options other than, being at home and working entry-level things. So one day this is kind of a crazy story. I went to a class. It was an entrepreneurship class. But anyway, so I went there one day and there was a recruiter in there. And I still remember his name. His name was Sergeant First Class Ronald Gooch. And he was a recruiter. And so he's talking to the class and he's saying all these things about, what the military has done for him and what it can do for us. And, I remember him saying like, hey, man, you want to see the world? Join the military. So that was Thursday afternoon. And by Saturday, I had gone to the MEP station, taken the ASVAB, said the oath and everything by Saturday morning. So, but it ended up being 3 days after graduation. I was gone to the Army.
Wow. So, okay. So take us on this path, this roadmap of joining the Army. How did you get involved in resiliency training from being an infantryman to being a master trainer of resiliency that now the Army uses in the National Reserves? So take us a little bit on that, and then we'll kind of get into picking your brain a little bit about resiliency and how we can teach it to our kids.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So when I left to the Army, I left with some of the same lessons learned from my childhood, from my youth, which wasn't always a good thing. So when I got to my first duty station, which was in Germany, I didn't have any skills that were taught to me that would allow me to be more productive person. And so I started off still kind of living the same life that I lived at home in the Army. And I started noticing really fast that if I didn't take care of myself, not just physically, but emotionally, then I was going to be in trouble. I started making an effort and doing things intentionally to make myself better. And sometimes that's just, getting up in the morning and making my bed, right? So that's something I had to do. That's something I felt that I had to do in order for me to start changing habit. So once I figured these things out, I started looking at myself in a different manner and saying, hey, I can be a respected person in this job, and I can be a likable person, and I can be someone that just gets along with people and that is optimistic, right? Because growing up, I didn't have very many optimistic views because, culturally, in a big, large Mexican-American family, optimism isn't one of those things that people in my family supported or even used. So I started using that optimism to make my life, to make my situation better, knowing that even though sometimes things did suck and I was away from home and sometimes I was lacking skills, I always had this view that eventually I'm going to learn something from this situation and be able to use it later. I'm almost at 19 years in the Army with my active duty and my reserve time. And when I got home, when I got done with active duty, I used to live in Utah. So when I got out of the Army, my wife was there. I had Anthony, my oldest child, was there. We just settled in, and I started working at schools. I had a small break in service from the military, about 4 years, that I was working in Ogden schools there. And I was seeing all these kids and working with all these kids. I was a math tutor that grew up the same way I grew up, right? That had the same situations and the same parental issues and family issues that I had. So I was seeing all these people and all these kids struggle and, trying to figure out who they are and all these things. So at that time, this was probably 2007, really 2006, 2007. I started noticing these things. And at that point in time, I said, you know what? I'm going to start using things that worked for me. And I'm going to start helping these kids here try to have a more optimistic view, try to problem solve a little better, and and just trying to spark motivation in them kids, because that's what it really took. So I was doing all this thing, the child protective services thing. I mean, it's a tough job, but I started doing that, and then I was seeing not only what other people see on the outside, but now I was getting like an inside view of really what was happening there in Ogden, and I was like, man, again, I took what I learned, took what I taught myself to try to help. But I knew eventually, without education, without experience and things like that, I was not going to be able to put a dent in that social issue at that time. But also along the way, I had coworkers. Civilians are totally different from people in the Army or in the armed services. Period. So they handle and they approach things differently. So I was seeing and witnessing and talking with people in the civilian world who I felt had problems that were easily overcomable, right? Easily, they were just small obstacles they had to get over. So I started taking all these things from working in schools and seeing these adults have similar problems, and I was like, man, there has to be something that I can do. And at that time, it was like, hey, go to college. So I went to Weber State to get my undergrad, and from there, I went into many types of social work jobs in the school district. As a school social worker, I worked with adjudicated youth when I did a time at Washington High School, the alternative school there in Ogden, and working with adjudicated youth, working with their families. And really at that time, I was just gathering strategies and techniques to help with the lack of resilience at that time. And then, I joined the Army Reserves after I graduated from Weber State, and I got commissioned as a second lieutenant. Now on the military side, I get to help them. And I had the opportunity to go to the Master Resiliency Trainer course that the Army sponsors. And it's a really intense course. So I went to that course. Man, I learned so many things, and it was kind of validating at the same time, because now I know that the strategies I was employing and those techniques that I was using with families and with kids was like science, right? It's scientifically proven things. I was using them, and along the way, I had some other things like the Y Try. I don't know if you heard of Y Try. It's a resilience program. It's done right there in Logan, Utah. They have a center there. So it's a pretty huge resilience training center. So I went there, I got that training. And then I said, again, in order to make this difference, in order to make a bigger splash, I need more education. So I went, to Boston University. I got my master's degree in social work, and after I graduated from there, unfortunately I had to, I left Ogden to come home, to my home. I'm from Galveston. I know there was a huge need as well for people like me, for passionate people to come back here to support. So now that I had all the experience that I needed, I had all the education, all the training, I came home and I said, you know what? It's time for me to do this on a much bigger scale. And that's where Island Resilience came into effect. So I created my own model. has 10 skills. And it's the 10 skills I feel along all of my time working with kids, working with adults, are the most needed skills to be more resilient.
Well, you've tickled my interest there. 10 skills. Do you mind going into some of those and sharing some of those?
Resilience is basically the capacity to bounce back from adversity, right? To overcome obstacles. But in order to do that, you have to have a plan. You have to have skills, and you have to develop these skills and use them to overcome these things, right? So one of the skills that I really hit hard on are relationship skills. The ability to establish and maintain healthy relationships, right? Healthy and rewarding relationships. When we think about relationships, not only do we have, interpersonal and personal relationships, you have to define what those relationships are. And communication is the main point of those relationships. Being an assertive communicator, being able to express how you feel. But communication is the key to that, being an assertive communicator. And don't get me wrong, sometimes people are passive and sometimes they're aggressive, and that's okay. I'm not saying that only assertive people can be resilient. What I'm saying is understanding your communication style and knowing what it is and when to use it. That's what makes you more resilient. So we have
Also makes you a better spouse, by the way.
It absolutely does. And this is just a plug. Currently, my wife is my editor. She edits all my stuff, and she's really my partner in all this. We are coming up with resilient marriages pretty soon, because it's needed. Self-care. Self-care is a huge deal. It's one of those things right now that everyone is talking about. But the thing about self-care is that you have to have a plan and you have to do it daily. There's all different kinds of self-care. For example, I like to ride my bicycle. We have a seawall here. I get on my bicycle, I ride almost every day. That's my time for myself. There's all different types of self-care, mental self-care, emotional self-care. Mindfulness is a part of self-care. So having a really good plan for self-care is important. So that I really hit on that. And when I do my training, I have a workbook. And every skill, it's a plan. So after every section, we create a plan for self-care, for relationship skills. I teach I statements because I think I statements are huge. Being able to take responsibility for your own emotions and not place the blame on others is the thing. Because I know you've heard many times when people say, "You make me feel this way," right? And there's a thing in our family where I say, "You can't make me feel anyway. I feel that way because of this." Setting boundaries and expectations. It's important in your marriage, also important in your professional life as well. So I statements, setting boundaries, self-care. We got relationship skills, empathy. Empathy is one of my hugest sections. Empathy is hard to do. It takes a lot of practice. But I talk about empathy blockers, and I talk about mirroring and how to really use empathy on purpose, because you have to, right? A lot of times empathy and sympathy get totally mixed up. Empathy is about attempting to feel what somebody else is feeling. And if you can't do that, then there's no connection, right? You're not connecting with anyone. All those skills, along with like needs, personal needs and things. I use Maslow's hierarchy of needs mostly with that. Just filling your basic needs is important. So I have these skills. During the workshops, I teach these skills and we make a plan for every single one of them. So that at the end, when they leave, they have like a working document. They have something they can go back to.
I like that you've taken kind of the science of a lot of these different things and incorporated them into a single training. I think of self-care. A lot of people use that term. I think most people think it's like, oh yeah, I went and got myself a pedicure or a manicure for ladies, or, I went hunting for a guy or something like that. But unless it's something that's more of a routine, then you really don't get the benefit of the self-care, because it just is a one-time deal. So I like that, creating a system and a routine of self-care. I think all of us could probably benefit from that.
So Ray, where do I find this information? Is that something that you take a class from you, or is that something that you have published, or like where would I find this information if I wanted to know more about this resilience training?
I provide in-person workshops and Zoom workshops. During the shutdown, I did a lot of Zoom things. I'm also working on an online go at your own pace platform. So that way people who are not in this area and people who, don't have the means or the time to attend a live session, they can do those at their own time. So that's currently in the works. And the plan for that is to have about 20 sessions, not long sessions, either from 5 to like 12-minute sessions where I talk about a skill, there's some reflection questions, and there's a small homework assignment and a challenge at the end. So I'll go through the whole program that way as well, so that people can do it at their own time. Because believe me, I get it. People are busy. They're working hard. You know what I mean? They got the kids and sports drop-offs and pickups and all that, because I got it too. So being able to push that out there at your own pace thing is my next big thing.
I'm thinking to myself, I'd love to do this resilience training, and I'd love to do it with my kids. Just have them walk through these great skills that you've been talking about. Have you done that with your kids? And how has that gone? And what would you say to other parents who want to teach their kids resiliency?
Fortunately, my kids live with a resilience specialist, so always using these skills to help them. And it's gotten to the point now where the language, the verbiage that I use in my resilience training and in the resilience life that I want to live is like crossing over to them now. You know what I mean? So my daughter, she's 14. You know what I mean? So sometimes having her explain things to me when she's upset or when she's angry, I like to give her that space. And that's something that I teach with identifying emotions and feelings, right? In order to identify your emotions accurately, sometimes you just need a break. You need a breather. Can I tell a story really quick?
Absolutely.
Yes,
we
course.
love stories.
So it was just yesterday, right? So as you know, my in-laws were down. My daughter had a volleyball game. So we live on the island, but my daughter goes to school on the peninsula that's next to the island. So in order to get to my daughter's school, we have to take a ferry over there. And so we go to the volleyball game. She's totally excited about my in-laws being there. Her grandma and grandpa are there. She wants to play good. She's not a starter. She got in the game. She did a couple of good things. She had a bad serve. And after that bad serve, she got taken out of the game and rotated in. And then after the game was over, the B team was going to play, right? But we're like, hey, we really need to get back to the island. We need to go. We're meeting my brother-in-law and family here for dinner on the island. So we had to come across the ferry to do those things. So she was not very happy about it. And people were trying to talk to her to try to get her to cheer up. And, one of those things about empathy is if you start a sentence with "at least," that's not being empathetic. And someone in the car uses this "at least" statement to her, and immediately she knew that's not being empathetic. You know what I mean? And so she got in a weird way. And then when we get on the ferry, I said, hey, listen, I see that you appear to be sad, right? Because I didn't want to say you are sad. I said, I know that you appear to be sad. I understand that your team is important to you and supporting your team is important. I understand all that. But you have to understand this too, is that your grandparents came in from Utah. We're going to have a family dinner for your birthday. So whatever time you need right now, I need you to take it. I need you to do whatever you need to do in order so that you can do an attitude reverse, right? I need you to reverse this attitude. I need you to be here with us. So whatever you need to do. And she just told me, she's like, right now I feel frustrated because people keep asking me a bunch of questions. And I'm a little sad because I didn't get to stay and cheer my team on because they cheer me on. I get it. I said, okay. Yeah. I said, whatever you need to do. She's like, I just need a few minutes to sit here and just be here. And I was like, all right, cool. So I gave her that time. And that's one thing I try to do often. It's like, hey, you need time? What do you need from me? But this is the thing. If you ask someone what they need, you got to be prepared to give it to them within reason, of course. You know what I'm saying? So I always try to help them identify those emotions correctly, right? Because a person could say, I'm upset right now. But if they're livid, that's not the same thing, right? Being upset and being livid, not the same thing. So I help them identify feelings appropriately. So my kids' emotion vocabulary is off the chart, man. They They use more than the big four, right? Angry, mad, happy, sad. They use more than those often. Helping them identify their emotions properly is where it starts. And from there, I can say, hey, do whatever you need to do. That's a coping skill, right? The kids know what their coping skills are. They use them all the time. And I allow them that space. And self-care is the same way on the weekends. In the morning, my little son, he gets up and this could become maladaptive and if it's used not properly, but he likes just to just chill in front of the TV for 10 minutes. I let him chill in front of the TV for 10 minutes and then he's ready to go. He gets dressed, he brushes his teeth, he eats breakfast. So all those things are daily. The kids know what I'm talking about when I say it. And that's when you know that you're being the most effective, is when they use the verbiage, they use the skills without me even having to tell them to do it.
Well, the world kind of throws everything at our kids nowadays. And I think a lot of coping skills, as you say that, a lot of the kids nowadays kind of just step away from things if they become hard. And that's the way they cope with it, is they say, well, I'm not going to engage with this. I choose to disengage with this, and that's a fine choice. But if they get into the habit of always disengaging with anything that is hard, then they will get into the habit of never having accomplished anything difficult. And so for me and my kids, like anybody that knows me or knows anything about the Gentleman Project, this is literally the first thing I taught my boys in the Gentleman Project, was that you can do hard things and you can do it without complaint. And because at that point, I think they were 5 and everything was, I'm too little, it's too hard, I can't do this. And I just realized that if I don't break that habit of them looking at things as, well, that's hard, I'm going to avoid it, that no matter what they do for a living, at some point down the road, they're going to have to do something difficult. And I don't care what you say about college degrees. There's a lot of bogus college degrees out there, in my opinion. But a college degree says I've chosen to do something and it's hard and I stuck with it until the very end and I got this piece of paper. If you quit halfway through college, or you quit before you get through high school, or you quit on a hard relationship, or you quit when exercise gets hard, or anything, you never really experience that growth. So talk to us a little bit about how we can teach our kids that they can do hard things by introducing things that they can accomplish and then building upon that.
That's a good one. I think it's so funny that you said that, because my wife's saying is, you can do hard things. She tells my kids that all the time. Yeah. So, one thing that I've done, and again, I've had the luxury of my kids growing up in Utah, right? So my kids growing up in Utah gave me the opportunity for other people to teach them things as well, right? So as you know, my father-in-law, James, he's there. There were lots of times when I wasn't there because I was deployed, or I was in Korea, or I was in training, or whatever. So I'm gonna get to your question, but I'm gonna preface it with this. So my kids being able to learn other things, not from me, is one way that really helped. My wife's brothers, at some point in time, both lived in Utah. My younger brother-in-law, he passed away, but before that happened and before he left the house, my kids, especially my son, my older son, was learning all kind of things. And he learned things that were healthy and productive from his uncles and from his grandpa and from me. But I noticed this is the thing that really helped me out, was giving kids responsibilities that they can handle at a young age. My older son, Anthony, every time he went to his grandparents' house in Utah, he was cutting firewood. I mean, as an 8-year-old, cutting firewood in the backyard, doing things like that. And it's more than just the stuff they have to do, right? It's more than just, hey, keep your room clean. It's more than those things. I always felt that with a little bit of support, kids can perform things that are above their developmental level. Even when my little daughter was really young, she always helped cook. That's her thing. She loves to help cook. And I remember her being tiny and having a step stool with like 3 steps at the stove, right? And she wasn't doing all the cooking, but she was helping with the cooking. So she was doing those types of things. And my little son now, pulling the trash can out to the curb. right? And he's outside. We were playing catch. And I says, hold up, time out. I got to take the trash can out. And so there I go. I grab the trash can. He's like, no, Dad, let me do it. I'm like, dude, it's kind of heavy, right? But I didn't want to put a limitation on him. So he says, I can handle it. I can do it. So he took the trash can and he got a few feet and he's like, hey, Dad, I helped you get it from that point to this point, and now you can take it the rest of the way, right? But I truly believe that if kids have responsibilities as young kids, and when they grow up, they can do things that are hard, right? They can do things that are above their developmental level. The way you talk to them when they're infants and toddlers. No, there was no baby talk in my house ever. It was like normal talk to them, get them going. Giving them more responsibility with support is the way to do it.
I always think when I look back at my kids growing up, one of the things that you usually think of hard work, you usually think of having to mow the lawn or clean the house or, take out the garbage. Some of the best things that we've done are instruments because that's hard. It's hard to learn an instrument, So I think sometimes as parents, we think it always has to be like a hard work thing. Well, I'm telling you what, learning the violin is hard work. And we've had to tell our daughter, who's 14 now, that same kind of thing. Like, babe, you may want to stop doing this because it's hard. But look how amazing you performed at this last concert, right? You have to show them that their hard work's paying off. So there's and even sports, I think we can teach through sports that same resiliency, right? Like you're not always good. And you have to work to get better. You have to work to make a team, or you have to work to, whatever. So I think if we're always teaching our kids learning and growing, some way to learn and grow through these, whatever it might be, and then figuring out how to do that with optimism, like you said, Ray. And I think that's a huge one. I tell my kids all the time that happiness is a choice, because most of the time it is. Meaning how we react to things is kind of on us. You mentioned that instead of saying, this is on somebody else, I can't do this because of someone else or something else. So I love what you were talking about. I need the 10 steps. I want to go through them with my kids and make sure I'm talking about things like empathy. That's awesome.
With the social media and the internet and virtual everything now, empathy kind of gets thrown out because people can say and do things on those kind of platforms without any repercussions, right? So you don't have to sit there and you don't have to take the time to be empathetic on Zoom. You don't have to take the time to be empathetic in your Facebook posts. You know what I'm saying? So I agree with you, man. Being able to teach that skill is very important, because eventually your kids, my kids, all the kids are going to be in a position where they're in the workplace, right? Or they're in a professional setting, or they have kids of their own, right? And so they're going to want their kids to be empathetic. I want mine to be. So teaching that skill, that's one of the most important ones, I feel.
I think about being out on the fence line at the ranch with my grandpa all day long. And we would like skip lunch and like come in when it got dark, and we'd realize we haven't eaten all day and we were sore and dirty. But you know what? Like, I always remembered he was teaching me during that whole process. It wasn't about the fence so much as it was about, I'm going to teach you that you can stay out and enjoy work all day long in the hot sun. You can accomplish the fence. The fence is the byproduct. The work is the chore that can be enjoyed. And so I think just letting your kids know, hey, we're doing this because this is hard. And tonight, when we get home and we go to bed, guess what? We will have done something hard today. And I think that's, a lot of people that help people develop schedules and routines, they say, accomplish the hardest thing first. The most important, hardest thing first, because then if you get nothing else done the rest of the day, you have at least accomplished a hard thing that day. And there's some accomplishment in that, and there's growth in that. Whereas if you just get up and you do the easiest thing that's the least important that day, every day, then you never get to that growth opportunity. So I think it's just important that we tell our kids while we're doing it, if we're doing it, and doing it next to them, not just saying, hey, go do this hard thing. and come back and tell me how it went, but go out and do it with them and show them that, they can do hard things, and I'm going to do it right next to you.
Ray, do you have any books or, like favorite books that you've studied through the years, or things that you like that you might recommend to the listeners to do?
Just recently, so John Gottman, he wrote like The Power of Positivity. I don't know if you've ever heard of John Gottman, but I went to one of his trainings, and he was actually at the training. He writes a lot of books about the power of positivity and positive teams and things like that. His books are really good. I follow another social worker. Her name's Brene Brown. She is a pretty famous social worker. She does a lot with empathy and guilt and things like that. She has tons of TED Talks that I listen to often. So whenever I see her, I'm like, hey, I'm seeing what Brene Brown has to say, maybe because she's a social worker, I'm a social worker, but, this is a little vulnerability on my part. Guilt is the hardest emotion that I have to deal with, right? So whenever I experience or whenever I have that guilty feeling, it's really hard for me to bounce back from that, right? So my wife knows when I start acting a certain way, it's not normal. It's not my baseline, right? And a lot of times behind those behaviors, right, behind those snarky comments and irritability is guilt. And guilt is a really hard thing for me to overcome quickly. But it's good because my partner, my wife, she knows about it too. You know what I mean? So if you want to learn about guilt, Brene Brown, she has a lot of stuff. I like listening to her.
Yeah, I've read a couple of her books and listened to several of her TED Talks too. And yeah, she's right there with that like guilt, shame, that we all deal with and that our kids deal with. So yeah, that's good stuff. So Ray, we're nearing the end of our time together on the podcast, which is too bad because I've really enjoyed this conversation. So if people want to engage with you, or talk to you further, they can go to your website, islandresilienccenter.com.
Yes.
And they can reach out and get in touch with you through that platform, right?
Yes.
So at the end of every podcast, being the Gentleman Project podcast, we ask our guests what they think it means to be a gentleman. So we'll give you the opportunity to answer that question as well.
First off, it's more than what people can see. Being a gentleman means that you're true to your word. You do what you say. A gentleman is a person who fulfills their responsibilities and takes care of what's most important to them. And, reaching the goals that they say, and also setting a good example, not just for their kids, but for other people's kids too, right? Because as we know, some kids don't have a gentleman in their life. So sometimes as gentlemen, we have to fulfill that need.
I love that. Be a gentleman in someone else's life, and we've been ending the podcast lately with the statement of be a gentleman. And that can be a gentleman to yourself. That can be a gentleman to your family. That could be a gentleman to anybody. A kid that doesn't have something like that in their life. I know because I've watched your father-in-law. So disclosure here, Ray is the son-in-law of James Hammond, who's a previous guest of ours, who is a really, really, really good friend of mine that I talk to almost on the daily. And he is the boss of my daughter. My daughter works the restaurant that James runs. One of the things that I love most about having my daughter work there is I know that James is a gentleman. And I know that he's going to teach my daughter lessons along the way. To have somebody like that in her life is great. My boys look up to James. So I know the love that your father-in-law has for your kids. I don't know that I've ever met a grandpa that loves his grandkids as much as he does yours. He's an incredible guy, one that I'm proud to call a friend, and and also thank you for the introduction to Ray, because I think you've delivered some great value to us on the podcast today. So I wanted to thank you for your 19 years of service in the military. There's not a lot of folks in our society nowadays that devote that much time to serving in the military And I know it's part of your family culture as well. I know Jessica served, and there's a lot of service in your family history. So just wanted to say thanks for your service, and we appreciate that from a civilian standpoint.
Awesome. Thank you. It's really good. And, to put my message out there, right. And to talk to you guys who value fatherhood and family just as much, because sometimes you don't get that. So I really appreciate having this conversation with you guys to talk about those things.
No, we need to have more conversations about fatherhood and parenting, and character skills and things like that, and also help if you're struggling as a dad or struggling as a parent, to reach out to a close friend and just say, hey, I'm not sure I've got this figured out. Would you just listen to me for a minute? Give me some advice.
Yeah. There's a resilience myth that states that resilient people don't need other people for support, right? But that's not the case. A resilient person trusts enough to seek help, right? To seek advice from other people. Resilient people reach out for support, man. It doesn't make you less of a resilient person. It doesn't make you less of a gentleman. It just makes you a person who knows what they need in life.
Yeah, I would say the most resilient people build relationships and have friends and have support. That's why they're so resilient.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being with us, Ray. I really, really appreciate it.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us on the Gentleman Project podcast today. Thank you to our guest, Rey Medellin, for joining us. We hope that you got some resiliency training out of just listening to the podcast today. And if it's something that interests you, please seek Rey out and engage him. Great resource. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please hop over to Apple Podcasts or any platform where podcasts are found. Give us a rating and a review. We'd sure appreciate that. That helps more people hear the podcast. And if you found some value today in the podcast, please share this with those that you love. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Corey Moore. Be a gentleman, everyone.